Lovely. And I will share. So thank you everybody for making the time to come today to listen to this webinar all about nutrition and ADHD, just exploring what the links are between those two items. And now, of course, I can't switch the slides. So just a little bit about what I'll cover today. I will give an introduction to myself because there are a couple of people here who I haven't met before. So thank you very much. Lovely to meet you. And I will give you an introduction as to who I am and what I am all about. I am going to give an overview of what ADHD actually is, but this is from a physiological perspective as well. So we'll go through a little bit about that. We'll go through a little bit about what's actually happening in the brain of an ADHD person. We will talk a little bit about executive function. That's one of the areas where ADHDers really struggle, is with that executive functioning and exactly what that means. I'll go through some common symptoms, although I'm sure people with ADHD know what their common symptoms are. I will go through a little bit about current management options, and those are normally pharmaceutical, within the pharmaceutical realm. Then I will go into what is the nutrition approach to ADHD. And because I want to leave you with something today, I'll talk about blood sugar balance, because that will be one thing that you can take away from today and implement that may help support you if you have a diagnosis of ADHD. And I'll explain why that is necessary later on as well. I don't know why I can't flick between my slides. So who am I? I am Dana Chapman. I am a nutritional therapist. Nutritional therapy is based on what we call functional medicine, which views the body as a set of systems. And if any individual is experiencing symptoms, that is often because of an imbalance in one or more of the systems of the body. I'm just trying to let somebody in as well. So that can be the digestive system, the reproductive system, the respiratory system, blood and transport. Those are all the types of systems within the body. So as a functional medicine practitioner, what I do is I look at a person and I say, okay, these are the symptoms you are experiencing. What has caused your body to experience these symptoms? What systems are out of balance? How can we rebalance them using diet, lifestyle, potentially supplementation, and some testing to identify what supplementation might be necessary to be able to support the removal or easing of those symptoms. So conventional medicine is very much, I have a headache, I'm going to give you a headache pill because I know the headache pill takes the headache away. Whereas functional medicine and nutritional therapy is, I have a headache. Okay, why do you have a headache? What did you eat yesterday? What did you do yesterday? What amount of stress are you under? Have you been able to get some fresh air today, etc., etc. And that's sort of how we look at a person and look at symptomatology. I can't say that word properly. Look at why somebody is showing symptoms and try and address what might be causing those. So I'm a founder of my own business. I'm a founder of DC Nutrition, name potentially to be changed in the near future. But that is my business. I have been working in the nutrition science field for about 7 years now, but I've had my own business for just over 2. So I have about 7 years experience in the industry, in the area. And my specific focus is actually mental health. So I specifically focus on nutrition for mental health. And that goes for depression and anxiety. But a lot of people with ADHD often experience depression and anxiety. So they very much are closely linked. And I'll talk through some of the reasons why that might be a bit later. So that is me and what I do. And now I've gone back for some reason. So what is ADHD? So ADHD, the official DSM classification defines ADHD as a persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity or impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development. It is termed as a neurobiological disorder, and I've put disorder in whatever those are called. Definitely having brain problems today. It is seen as a neurobiological disorder by the industry, but what we need to remember is all of us on this call today, we are a collective of neurodiverse people. Neurodivergent people are people with ADHD or autism. And it is necessary in an environment, in a community, to have all of these different types of people who think in different ways. So we need to stop thinking of it as a disorder, but rather, how do we support those who are neurodivergent, who are trying to fit themselves into a world that potentially isn't neurodivergent? So there's nothing wrong with ADHD. There's nothing wrong with you. Yes, your biology works in a different way and the chemistry within the brain works in a different way, but it's about supporting that and supporting any negative symptoms that somebody with ADHD might have. So there are two different types of ADHD. Normally, the one type is an inattentive type of ADHD. The other type is impulsivity or that hyperactivity. So a lot of women, especially in their 30s and 40s, are now being diagnosed with ADHD, potentially because they were not picked up during schooling, because during schooling, the people who had ADHD were those naughty boys who couldn't sit still because of that hyperactivity. So we do know that there's now these two different arms. There's the inattentive arm, and then there's the impulsive and hyperactivity arm as well. Prevalence of ADHD is around 5%. So in children, that ranges now from about 5 to about 7%. And in adults, it's actually a lot lower, but it's probably because lots of people haven't been diagnosed. So it's been spoken about a lot more. It's a lot more prevalent now. So a lot more people are getting diagnoses, but especially women are very good at masking any symptoms of ADHD, and so may not have a diagnosis because of that masking and because of the coping mechanisms that you may have put in to be able to deal with any ADHD symptoms that you may have. ADHD is complex and it is multifactorial. It is not just that your brain doesn't work in the right way. A lot of the systems of the body actually are involved as well. There is the potential of not being able to detoxify efficiently and effectively. There's a very, very big gut health link to ADHD, although the research hasn't quite caught up with that. So we can't say that the gut microbiome or an imbalanced gut microbiome may cause symptoms of ADHD, but we know that there is a very big link between the gut and the brain. ADHD is associated widely with diverse profiles of behavior, cognition, emotion, and motivation. So somebody with ADHD might find that they struggle in all of those areas. Behavior, cognition, your emotions might be very heightened or very blunted. And ADHD people often experience a very big lack of motivation, especially if it's something that's not going to give you a very nice dopamine hit, because ADHD people are often seeking that dopamine. ADHD is very comorbid, and what I mean by comorbid is it's associated with lots of other conditions as well. And I think I've got this later on in a few more slides in a little bit more detail. But ADHD is very much comes alongside things like depression and anxiety, like I mentioned earlier. But you also see things like celiac disease, which is an autoimmune condition. So celiac disease and the correlation of ADHD is very high. And then other conditions, other autoimmune conditions can play a role here as well. There is a genetic component, but there are environmental factors as well. So if you have a child that has been diagnosed with ADHD and you start to, when you're filling out their form, start to see a lot of the things are very much what you experience, there is a very high likelihood that you may have ADHD if your child is diagnosed with ADHD. And the reverse is true as well. So if you have ADHD, the chances that your child might have it may be higher. What we see in an ADHD brain, some people have actual structural and functional brain changes, but the research shows that this is not consistent. So I don't know if anyone listened to the Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO episode where he was diagnosed with ADHD just by having a brain scan. The research is not consistent in that. So just because you have ADHD doesn't mean that you can pick it up in a brain scan. And just because you have it in a brain scan doesn't necessarily mean that you have ADHD either. There are no diagnostic biomarkers, and biomarkers are things that you can measure in your blood. So there's nothing, you can't go for a blood test to say that you have ADHD, because we are all so unique and we present in such different ways as well. So what is actually happening in the brain of an ADHD person? And we know that the symptoms of ADHD are thought to be caused by inefficient information processing in the prefrontal cortex of the brain. So that's your decision-making center that sits right at the front of your brain. And the information processing is inefficient because it's driven by imbalances in neurotransmitters dopamine and norepinephrine. So dopamine we actually think of as the reward center, but dopamine also helps to reduce any noise. So an ADHD brain is often very active because you don't have that dopamine to calm down any noise that you are feeling in that brain. And I heard an analogy recently that was really useful. And the analogy was of a bench. So if you think of your bench is all of the things that you have to deal with in life, and then all the things that you have to deal with are pieces of paper on that bench. And if you have loads of pieces of paper all scattered around on that bench, you might find it very, very difficult to know what to do first or to deal with things in the correct way. And it's because you don't have that dopamine to help reduce the noise and start piling things up in a good way. Norepinephrine, on the other hand, enhances any signals in the brain. But we need to also not forget that serotonin plays a large role as well. So serotonin may be able to help regulate any hyperactivity or impulsivity. So ADHDers are maybe very impulsive buyers. So you might want to go and spend a lot of money on something that you think is going to give you a dopamine hit. And it could be that your serotonin is low as well. And that serotonin being low may also be causing that hyperactivity or that impulsivity. So what does the prefrontal cortex actually do for you? What is the role of the prefrontal cortex? And you can see here, it's that executive functioning, comprehension, reasoning, problem solving, regulation of thoughts and emotions. It's the impulse control and the perseverance. So not having that dopamine and norepinephrine working effectively in that prefrontal cortex means that you might then struggle with any of these elements that the prefrontal cortex is responsible for doing. So ADHD very much linked to poor executive function, and poor executive function, I don't know if somebody had a question. Poor executive function affects attention. It affects focus, concentration, memory, impulsivity, hyperactivity, organization, social skills, decision-making, planning, motivation, task switching, and learning from past mistakes. So ADHDers might find it really difficult in some or all of these areas as well. So common symptoms of ADHD can be carelessness or lack of attention to detail, continually starting new tasks before finishing old ones, poor organizational skills, inability to focus or prioritize, continually losing or misplacing things, difficulty keeping quiet or speaking out of turn, mood swings and irritability, restlessness and edginess, extreme impatience, inability to deal with stress, forgetfulness, taking risks often in activities. And again, a lot of that risk-taking behavior is that search for dopamine, because you don't produce dopamine in the way that neurotypical people do. I just wanted to put this up here because lots of people don't realize what symptoms are typically ADHD symptoms. And apologies, Mike, that this is women only. But we see here women are very good at masking ADHD, and you see the symptoms that differ between age groups. So from 0 to 9, you might see some emotional dysregulation, some inattention, and some social struggles. Whereas between 20 and 39, you see more procrastination, there's a lot of overwhelm and time management difficulties. Again, from 40 to 59, you see overwhelm, but you start to see things like brain fog creep in and memory issues. That can be to do with the impact that estrogen has in our bodies and brains. But it can also be when you get older, you have a lot more to deal with. And if you've already got a very busy mind, having more things to deal with can become more difficult.
Dana, I'd probably reflect that it's probably fairly similar in my case. Obviously, I don't have quite such a kind of an estrogen kind of issue, but yeah, I would say that the older that I've got, the more I've noticed the the challenges. So.
And interesting that you note that, because I think the older we get, the more all of our systems need support. The older you get, the more toxic load you have had in your life. The older you get, you might start moving less as well. So all of these factors have a role to play, actually. I spoke about comorbidities earlier, and this is just a bit of an expansion on that. So comorbidities is things or conditions that arise alongside ADHD, and it's the stats are as many as 80% of adults with ADHD have at least one coexisting psychiatric disorder. So that includes mood and anxiety disorders, substance use disorders, personality disorders. But lots of people with ADHD are very susceptible to burnout as well. And again, it's because of that overactive brain, not knowing what to do, not being able to switch off. And that all causes extra stress. So often ADHD might go undiagnosed, because if you're going through the medical system, they might say, oh, you've just got anxiety, or oh, you've just got depression, or oh, you've got personality disorder. And that's the label that you're given, that's the diagnosis that you have. But really the underlying reason why you may be suffering from anxiety or depression or a personality disorder is the underlying ADHD. But we see also that things such as sleep disorders, I don't know if anyone's heard of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is hypermobility. So often we see hypermobility in ADHD. fibromyalgia, sensory processing disorder, sleep apnea is a very interesting one. Sleep apnea and ADHD often go together. And people with ADHD often are of a later chronotype as well, actually. So are better in the evening than they are in the morning. And society doesn't really allow us to be that way, which often then means that you're going against what your biology or your physiology is saying is best for you. And that's why you might suffer more symptoms as well. So let's go to current management options. And this is specifically within the medical world, because once you get a diagnosis, often the only thing that the doctor or psychiatrist can offer you is pharmaceuticals. So we have psychostimulant medication, and we've also got non-stimulant medication. Psychostimulant medication is shown to improve inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity in children and adolescents. I don't think there have been many studies in adults. And then there are non-stimulant meds. Normally, doctors will try you on the psychostimulant medication first. And if those don't work, they might move you to the non-stimulant medication. Often you get started on something and titrated up or down. But all of these medicines come with side effects. And often the side effects are, they affect your appetite. They might affect food cravings. But what we also know is the efficacy of medication remains a matter of debate. We can't 100% say that putting people on medication is going to resolve all of their symptoms. And often it doesn't. Often it takes the edge off, but that's also at the cost of the side effects that the medication brings. Little is also known about safety of extended administration of psychostimulants. So long-term use of ADHD medication, especially in adolescents, has shown to reduce height, so it can stunt growth. And long-term use of medication does also impact the heart. So there have been studies to show that long-term use of psychostimulant medication increases your risk of heart disease. So I'm not saying this to scare anyone. I am not a doctor. I can't tell anyone to go on medication or to take themselves off medication. But what I am here to say is, if you are choosing the medication route, be aware of the side effects and be aware of the other things that we can do to support. So there's no cure for ADHD. It is a neurobiological disorder. It's what you're born with. It's what you will have. You don't grow out of it either. So if a child has ADHD, they will have ADHD for the rest of their life. So it's not about curing ADHD, but it's about managing the symptoms, trying to help improve memory, focus, energy, and concentration. And all of these things we can do through our diet and lifestyle. Trying to reduce brain fog, which is what I had at the beginning of this call when I couldn't think of my words. So brain fog is that you can't really think clearly about anything. You might go to the fridge for something and get to the fridge and forget what you've gone there for. And brain fog and gut health have a very strong link to each other. It's about improving that executive function. Now, that executive functioning relies on dopamine and norepinephrine. So how can you manage your dopamine? And you can do that definitely through diet and lifestyle and supporting the gut. We can improve the quality of sleep. So can you improve the quality of sleep by getting some daylight exposure during the day? Can you make sure that your blood sugar levels are balanced throughout the day? Reducing any comorbid symptoms. So if there's depression and anxiety, or if there is autoimmunity, it's about reducing any symptoms of those as well. We can improve quality of life and we can improve energy. And all of these we can do through diet and lifestyle. So, like I said earlier, nutritional therapy is about understanding what is going on in your body and how best to support it. We are all unique. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And so it's about understanding what's going on for you and how best to support you. Some common imbalances that we see within the body in ADHD include things like blood sugar irregulation. So genetically, or what we call the pathophysiology of an ADHD person, just means that they are not able to deal with carbohydrates and glucose in the way that neurotypical people are. So very much you're at risk of that blood sugar irregulation, and blood sugar irregulation can lead to things like a lack of energy, and it can lead to things like brain fog, not being able to focus. And it can then also lead to cravings, especially things like sugar, to get that energy boost. The other reason why potentially people with ADHD struggle with blood sugar regulation is because ADHDers can have what we call, and I'm going to forget the word, poor interoception. Interoception is the feeling of being hungry or the feeling of being full. So ADHDers might get hyper focused on something and forget to actually eat because you're not as much in tune, or you don't get the signals as strongly that you are hungry and that you need to eat. So blood sugar regulation is really strong, a really big one. Our brains also use glucose as energy. The brain is one of the most energy hungry organs in the whole body. I think it takes up 20% of your daily calories is needed just to be able to run your brain. And unless you follow a ketogenic diet and therefore your brain is working on fats or ketones, all of our brains work on glucose. So if your blood sugar levels are imbalanced throughout the day, you will find it difficult for your brain to function optimally. Other imbalances that we see in ADHD is often in that neurotransmitter production. ADHDers don't produce as much dopamine. They don't produce as much serotonin. GABA is our anti-anxiety neurotransmitter, and norepinephrine. And we know that dopamine and norepinephrine are responsible for that calming down of the noise and that motivation. We often see nutrient imbalances in ADHD as well. And the main one is actually copper and zinc imbalances. Now, zinc is very important for brain health and brain function. And copper and zinc work in opposition to each other. So if your copper levels are high, it's going to drive your zinc down, which means you don't have that zinc to be able to help your brain function optimally. And lots of research has shown that, especially in children and adolescents, there's very much a nutrient imbalance between copper and zinc. Iron is another one. The other nutrient that ADHDers are often deficient in is magnesium. I always like to refer to magnesium as nature's tranquilizer. It helps calm us down, but magnesium is needed for over 300 processes in the body. The other really important aspect of magnesium is energy production. So we can correct nutrient imbalances within ADHD, and that may help support any symptoms that you may be experiencing. We know that there are gut microbial imbalances in ADHD, and ADHD often it's comorbid with autism. And we know through the research that autism has a very distinct gut microbial pattern. And we know in ADHD that the gut microbiome plays a really large role as well. If you have got something called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, with which I'm seeing a lot in clinic, often that comes with things like brain fog. So what's going on in the gut that is causing you to potentially have brain fog, to potentially have inflammation in the brain? What is going on in the gut that you're not producing enough serotonin, you're not producing enough dopamine, you're not producing enough GABA? And how can we support that gut microbiome to help you produce things like dopamine more internally, so that you're not always looking for that dopamine hit externally. We know that there is a level of neuroinflammation. So neuroinflammation is inflammation within the brain, and that has been implicated in ADHD as well. So what about thinking about a diet that's really high in omega-3? So some oily fish 3 times a week, potentially using an omega-3 supplement. Omega-3 is very important for brain health and brain function, but it's also important for reducing any inflammation in the body as well. And there are links with celiac disease. So is it celiac that might be causing imbalances in how your brain is functioning and firing? Or is it actually the ADHD that is causing the symptoms that you might have? So very important to have a celiac screen if you do have an ADHD diagnosis, and the doctor should be able to do that by a simple blood test. Lots of people, especially in the autistic field, find that a gluten-free and dairy-free diet significantly helps reduce any symptoms. So blood sugar balance. This is one of the key elements, and this is one takeaway that I want to give you for today, so that you can go away and start implementing something to help support you. And I mentioned that blood sugar balance is one of the keystone things that I always start all of my clients with, because no matter how much we've heard about blood sugar balance, we're still doing it wrong. But if your blood sugar levels are imbalanced, it's going to cause mood swings. It's going to cause you not to have focus. It's going to cause you to crave sugar. So the key to maintaining stable energy and brain function and reducing any hyperactivity is balancing your blood glucose levels. You balance your blood glucose levels by making sure that you have fat and protein at each meal. And the portion size that we're looking at is about the size of your palm. So it's the size and thickness of the palm of your hand is the amount of protein that you should be eating with each meal. The good thing is protein contains amino acids, and our neurotransmitters are made from amino acids. So dopamine is actually made from tryptophan. So is our serotonin made from tryptophan. So you need to be having enough tryptophan in your diet so that your body can actually make your dopamine. So ensuring that you've got protein with each meal. So for breakfast, that might look like eggs or smoked salmon. It might look like a full-fat Greek yogurt, maybe with a little bit of protein powder thrown in there, or collagen to increase that protein intake. For lunch, you want to be thinking about beans, lentils, cheese, eggs, again, if you haven't made them. Leftovers. Leftovers are a great way to incorporate, to have things at hand to be able to make a meal easily. Try and make it simple for yourself as well. So if you know that you're not going to have time during the week, what about making something like a frittata over the weekend? So you've got that in the fridge and it's easy to go and grab. Nuts and seeds are a great way to bulk out the fat and the protein with each meal. Now, our brains are 60% fat, and we've gone through a very long time of being told that fat is bad for us, or fat is going to make us fat. And in fact, the opposite is true. It's actually glucose and carbohydrates that make us fat because of the role that they have to play in our insulin. So we need to be eating fat to be able to give our brains the fat that they need to have the energy to function optimally. So again, things like oily fish, eggs, nuts and seeds are all great sources of fat. Olive oil, 3 tablespoons of olive oil a day is incredible for the gut microbiome. And that is me, actually. That is the end. I would love to take any questions that you might have. What I might do actually is stop the recording.